but let's see whether you would actually get a band 9. The first thing is pronunciation. The examiner will be thinking about two things. Clarity, can they understand all the words that you're saying? And then higher level pronunciation features. So we'll talk about clarity first. You're from India, and there's nothing wrong with having an Indian accent, a Vietnamese accent, an Irish accent.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with any of those things. But a lot of the Indian students that we work with are worried about their accent being too strong.
Okay.
I don't think that there's a problem with having a strong accent in any accent, but I think what they're saying is that their accent causes problems for the listener with certain words.
Yeah.
That is not an issue for you at all. There's not a single word that I couldn't understand. You still have your Indian accent, and that's a great thing. You should be very proud of it.
Yeah.
There aren't extra marks for sounding British or sounding American. I'm sure that you know lots of Indian celebrities that have an Indian accent but speak English very, very clearly. Priyanka Chopra, for example, like she speaks with an Indian accent, but you can understand every word. That's the same with you. So you're doing very, very well there. One thing about being nervous and being stressed is that people can sometimes speak kind of inside their mouth and speak at the back of their throat because it's just a subconscious thing where we don't want to be criticized. We're afraid of saying something wrong, so we kind of speak inside our own mouth. I used to do it when I was a child. My little 9-year-old boy does it all the time. It's about confidence, you know. You didn't do that, but I could see that if you were really under pressure and you were very like, let's say you had a visa deadline and you must get this and, you know, everyone's expecting you. You could go into the test and speak inside your mouth. That could affect clarity and could drop your score a little bit. It didn't happen this time. My best advice would be, imagine you're speaking to the examiner and they are sitting against that wall and pointing 10 feet away. All right. So we're about 6 feet away, double that.
Okay.
All right. Don't be afraid of, like, I'm speaking quite loud to you at the minute. Don't be afraid of, because you seem the type of person that maybe thinks speaking loudly at someone is rude, and some, I don't know, some different cultures like that. Is that the case in India or?
Yeah, it is, I think.
I'm Irish, so we don't care how loudly we, you know, if you go to an Irish pub, you'll hear how the volume that most people speak. Up the volume a little bit. Again, pretend that they're 10 feet away instead of 6 feet away. You also use higher level pronunciation features quite well. Intonation. So the intonation is when our voice goes up and our voice goes down. If I come home late and my wife says, fine, that doesn't mean fine. You know? So we use intonation to convey meaning. So fine, the same word, two completely different meanings. One, I'm in trouble, one, everything is actually fine. When people are nervous, they tend to have quite flat intonation. You didn't do that, but on test day, just be aware of that. A good tip is to, before the test, record yourself speaking and listen to your intonation. If I listen to you speak to your friends, your intonation would be more extreme, I think, because hey, how's it going? You know, more when people are in a test and they're nervous and they're formal, they tend to speak more like this and very, very formal. It is not a formal test, and you might get an examiner who is very friendly. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes they had everybody has a bad day, and their intonation might be quite flat and formal and robotic. And people often mirror other people, especially when there's a power dynamic, like someone seems more powerful because they're an examiner. Some students go in and they have great intonation outside the test, and then they go into the test and their intonation, their speech patterns are a little bit rigid and formal and robotic. That wasn't the case, I don't think, with you. A little bit maybe, but not a big deal. Okay. Next is coherence and fluency. Coherence is, did you answer the question? It's like, if I asked you to talk about when the weather was perfect, did you actually mention a day when the weather was perfect? And you did. all the questions, you actually answered them and you developed them enough. Even some of the questions in part 3 that you had difficulty with, you developed them enough. And that was absolutely fine. I have no problems with that at all. Your fluency, the only time when you had an issue with fluency was in the middle of part 2 when you were reformulating things and you were repeating things to try and think of other things. That is fine because you only did it once in part 2. It's not like they focus in, oh, you paused one time or you repeated something one time. They will listen to the whole thing and base the score on the whole thing. And you did an excellent job overall. You did pause at some times in part 3 when you were trying to think, but that had nothing to do with your language ability. Some people pause when they're trying to think of what's the correct adjective or what's the correct verb to use and what's the tense to use. You didn't do that. It was only really about ideas. And again, that's related to stress and nervousness because people think that the examiner wants the best idea or the correct idea. Remember, it's a speaking test. There are no extra marks for great ideas. You could be the leading expert in the world on weather and weather forecasting, or you could know nothing about it. It doesn't matter. All that matters is your pronunciation, your fluency, your grammar, and your vocabulary. So just do what you did. And if you get an unusual topic or a topic you're not comfortable with, do what you did, which is attempt it, but explain like, I don't really know much about this. And again, just don't put too much pressure on yourself thinking, I need to give the world's greatest answer. You don't. For grammar, so there's 2 things the examiner will think about. One is the range of your grammar. Do you have enough grammar? So if I ask you about the past, do you know how to use past simple, present perfect? If I ask you about things to do in the future, do you have future structures? Do you know how to use comparatives and superlatives and all of these different little grammar structures? Everything that I threw at you, you were able to cope with that. So I don't think there's any problem with your range of grammar at all. The second thing that the examiner will think about is your accuracy. Overall, your accuracy is very good. There's no systematic errors. What a systematic error is, every time you use that part of grammar, such as articles or prepositions, every time or nearly every time you use it, you make a mistake. That means that system, that part of the grammar, you don't know how to use that yet. You don't have that, but you do have little slips every now and again. And those are not a huge problem. So for example, you have these errors. Most of the time you use prepositions correctly, but sometimes you have little slips. So most of the time you use articles, you use them correctly, but sometimes you make little slips, but they're quite rare. And they don't stop me understanding what you're saying. So if you said to me, my friend and I went to a cinema instead of my friend and I went to the cinema, that doesn't stop me understanding that you and your friend went to a cinema. So for grammar, you would get a very high score, but on test day, if you're nervous and that MacBook Pro starts having too much pressure on it, just like a computer, we make more mistakes when we're nervous and when we're stressed out. So there's nothing wrong with your grammar. Again, the biggest enemy is really yourself. The more pressure you put on yourself, the more mistakes that you will make. Vocabulary. So there's 2 things that the examiner will think about. Accuracy. Are you using words accurately to describe things and nouns, verbs, adjectives? Are those actually accurate? The words that you're using. You've no problem with accuracy at all. And then the second thing is range. When I ask you about weather, do you have enough weather vocabulary to do that? When I ask you about, we were talking about high school and education, do you have enough vocabulary? You do, but I think that you play it safe a little bit. So the weather was nice. Are there other ways that you could describe the weather? That is not inaccurate. And there's nothing wrong with that. But in a speaking test, you are capable of showing off your vocabulary more. Now, for the vast majority of people, I would say the opposite. Especially people from India tend to show off and add in these crazy big, long, amazing words, and they think that will boost their score. You have the opposite problem, which I think that which is quite rare. Is you're capable of using more vocabulary, but you play it quite safe. And it all depends on what score you want. If you want the absolute top score, you don't have to every sentence be throwing in a big complicated word, but you just have to, every now and again, throw in something a little bit more advanced, and that would really, really help you. Am I correct in that you are capable of doing that? Or you are? Yeah. Up to you what you want to do, but that would be my advice. So for pronunciation, if you were nervous and you were speaking inside your mouth, you would get, on test day, you would probably get a band 8, but I think that you are capable of a band 9. I think today you were a band 9, which is the top score. Fluency, on test day, if you were repeating things a little bit and you're searching for ideas and you're putting too much pressure on yourself, you possibly could get a band 8. I think you're capable of getting a band 9. Today, I think that you were a band 9, which is the top score. What it says for grammar is that even a band 9 student can make slips. I think that today you probably would get a band 9. On test day, if you're nervous and you make them a wee bit more regularly, you would get a band 8. Vocabulary, I think today you were a band 8 because all of your stuff is accurate, but you're playing it too safe. Today you would get a very, very high score, but in our next test, I'll be expecting an even higher score because I think you can do way better than that you're currently showing. What do you think about that? Any questions or anything?
No.
No?
Yeah.